So I'm just wanting to introduce our event today and welcome all of our presenters and all of you. We can go to the next slide. So this is our team. I just want to first stress my gratitude for Muhammad and Megan, who've been working in collaboration with Diana and I for many months. It's been an amazing experience. I will let Muhammad and Megan introduce themselves. Diana introduced herself. I am Kara. I help to lead our CTAC work with Diana and others. I'm a social worker for over 25 years. I have done a variety of work from community-based work to private practice to a bunch of other things in between. I'm grateful to be at the McSilver Institute working on CTAC for the past 14 years. I will pass it over to you, Mohammed, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Kara. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohammed. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a professional youth peer advocate. I still currently hold my professional credential, and I also hold a bachelor degree in women and gender studies. And I will pass it off to Megan.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. My name is Megan Simpson. I am the co-founder and development director of Now She Speaks. We provide advocacy, public speaking, and education related to domestic violence and human trafficking. I have been working in the mental health field for about 9 years now. I've worked with a variety of populations in different roles, youth, adults, formerly incarcerated individuals, LGBTQIA individuals, and I am also an independent consultant. So I'm just so thrilled to have been able to partner with CTAC on this training. And I will pass it to Diana.
Oh, thank you so much, Megan. Yes, so my name is Diana Arias. I'm also with the Community Technical Assistance Center at NYU's McSilver Institute. I'm Director of Innovation Education. My background is in social work and psychology, and I have worked across various settings. So I'm also delighted to be here with you all today. Thanks.
Wonderful. So thank you. That's who we are. And you all chat, some of you chatted in who you are. So it's great to be here with you all. Can we go to the next slide? Just want to go over our agenda today. So as Diana mentioned, this is part one of two parts of partnering with youth training. We're going to have a little fireside chat with Megan and Muhammad. We're going to talk about partnering with youth frameworks. We're going to talk about breaking down power dynamics and then lead into barriers to authentic partnership. And then we're going to end our time together talking about nurturing trust. So that's what we're going to do today. If we can go to the next slide, we do want to hear from you about what brought you to the training today. So just chat into us. I'm going to follow the chat, and you could also unmute yourself if you'd like to do that. Ayana
Good
says,
morning, it's easier. I came to this training, and this is take number 10, and I work with teenagers, and sometimes I don't know how to get to them, and it's really that's the reason why I'm here, and I thought it was really important to learn a little bit more about teens.
thank you. Thank you for being here and for sharing that. And I would love to hear from you at the end of part two to see if that's different for you. And that goes for everybody who's participating as well. I want to add to my toolbox. People are agreeing with you. Teens are a special sort. Any help to connect is welcome. The more knowledge, the better. My program director asked me to join. I understand. Can always learn more. We have a bunch of youth peer advocates in the room. Thank you for being here. Your voice is so important. I want to have more current information to work with teenagers. Seems like an interesting topic. Youth are always changing, so we need to keep up. Yes, Ayana. Megan, add to my toolbox. Kara, to be able to connect better with my kiddos. I wanted to learn more, Yakira. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. We hope that you are going to get those needs met during our time together. We're going to talk about a variety of topics in regards to partnering with youth. But at the end of our training, our hope is that you feel more confident and able to partner, have an authentic partnership with youth. Okay. So we can go to the next slide, because why is that important? Well, I mean, you all kind of got to this a little bit because it really encourages youth to engage in treatment, right? It really promotes self-advocacy, self-efficacy, self-empowerment when there is a real partnership with youth. It's really essential to create change, right? We can't create change if we don't feel partnered with. It's also increases the likelihood of the successful treatment. And then partnering with youth has to be intentional and deliberate. It doesn't happen on its own, right? So it has to be really intentional and really deliberate. And as you're going to hear this word a lot, authentic, right? So we can go to the next slide. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague.
Great, thank you, Kara. So clearly you're all here, as you mentioned in the chat box, to really build on your capacity to genuinely partner with young people in whatever role or capacity or program setting that you're in. So we thought, what better way to get us started than to really hear about how critically important it is that the youth that you work with have an active role in their care. As you heard, two of our presenters, Megan and Mohammed, are certified credentialed youth peer advocates. So we wanted to really start off by modeling what we're talking about, right? And although they are youth peer advocates now, they do have experience being in the mental health system. So I think their stories will really highlight the critical role that you play in terms of partnering with youth, making them feel genuinely heard, giving them voice, creating the space for that. So we do want to turn to two questions that both Mohammed and Megan will engage in on the following slide. I do also just want to highlight that there will be a mention of self-harm. So again, obviously taking that perspective of taking care of you if you need to step away or whatnot, but did want to just give you a little bit of an upfront warning. So with that said, in terms of Megan and Mohammed, wondering if you could share with us, and again, I do appreciate you sharing that, sharing the following with us, but talk a little bit about any experiences as a youth receiving services and how you felt when you were not partnered with in your care, and specifically, what was the impact of that? And then on the flip side, if you can share a time when you did experience partnership with your provider in care, right? So just we can sort of see the differences there and really bring to life what it means to partner with youth and why it is critically important. So Megan, Mohammed, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you so much. So we are going to have our little fireside chat. And Muhammad, would you get us started?
Sure. So thinking about, your own experiences when you were receiving, services, how did you feel when you weren't partnered with, and what was that impact on your end?
So when I was 14 years old, I was struggling a lot with self-harm. Some of the wounds had healed at the point where I was discussing this with my counselor. However, I had like extremely dark scars. I didn't want to talk to any adults about it because I really didn't feel like any adults would understand. I was also embarrassed by having these scars, and I was really ashamed about what I had done to myself. Um, Usually I felt very judged. I felt like people thought I was doing it just for attention, but my self-harm was not related to attention. I was doing it out of a sense of self-hate. I had shame related to memories of being abused, and it also became a behavioral addiction of self-harming on a consistent routine. So, when I was in a counseling session, I was describing how looking at my scars was triggering. Even though I didn't understand the term triggering at the time, I was sharing how I was really emotionally distressed. And my counselor gave me a remedy instead of addressing the emotion.
Well, first, I want to thank you for sharing that experience with me and everyone here. And from what I understand, it really sounds like the counselor was more so focused on finding an immediate solution for the long term rather than one that actually helped you in the moment, such as like processing your emotions and helping you develop skills for that trigger.
Yeah, that is exactly what happened. My counselor at the time, she had suggested a scar cream that would make the scars fade over time. But what I really
Mhm.
needed her to do was offer different coping skills for emotional regulation when I saw the scars and was triggered. Later on, a different counselor had partnered with me on this. She recognized the need to address the emotions that came with the trigger, and she began teaching me dialectical behavioral therapy skills or DBT coping skills. And then, even with her teaching me DBT, I got a choice in what I wanted to focus on, such as which coping skills I felt comfortable with, what units I wanted to focus on first. And the skills helped address the trigger, the emotion, and the behavior. So, Muhammad, have you ever experienced a provider not giving you any options?
Yes, and that was when I really didn't have a voice and how I can talk about my own experiences with my provider. Most providers would just defer to my parents to get the information on what happened instead of talking to me directly, especially in my teen years when I was very much cognitively capable of talking about my experiences. And sometimes I wouldn't even talk to the provider at all, and the conversation would just happen and everything would be done without my input.
Yeah, I completely get how frustrating it is. I also experienced that, but how did that make you feel?
Truth be told, I felt embarrassed because, especially when my parents would talk about me, it was as if I wasn't there. And sometimes they would even exaggerate certain details I would tell them when that really wasn't the case. It was almost as if my parents had to take what I was telling them and make it more believable for the provider to even give me some care. However, eventually I began to work with one provider who really did begin to ask me about my experiences directly from me instead of asking my parents. And at first, I really wasn't sure how to respond because that wasn't something I was really used to. But over time, I began to talk about my experiences in my own words, and I felt less embarrassed by that. And sometimes I would even tell the provider details that I wouldn't even tell my parents. They would ask me like clarifying questions, and they would even give me options, and they would partner with me on how I can take care of myself, directly instead of just solely telling my parents.
What I'm getting from here is it seems like we were both able to speak for ourselves, and given options when that happened, we felt more comfortable with our provider. And although we didn't know it at the time, our providers doing this was actually empowering our voice, our choice, and building a partnership between our providers and us.
Yes, and this also goes to show that partnering with youth doesn't require such grandiose change, but really minute ones that really have a large impact on how youth work with their providers. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Megan and Mohammed, for sharing that. So yes, again, appreciate your honesty, your transparency, your vulnerability, right? To really highlight again, as Kara covered, the importance of partnering with youth. And I really want to echo what you said, Mohammed, at the very end, right? That sometimes it is just very small things that we don't even think of doing that can have such a great impact, either negatively or positively, right? So maybe sometimes just focusing on what's in front of us and not really taking the time to provide care in a way that's trauma informed, and we'll move to that shortly, right? But let's look at the reasoning behind the behavior, right? What has happened, and it's a coping mechanism, but how can we redirect or help sort of support healthier coping mechanisms? But you only really get that information from asking the youth if and when they're ready to share with you too, right? And Mohammed, I know, we'll also cover later on the fact that youth voice sometimes is devalued, right? There's not a space that's created for them, and we shift towards the adults in the room. And now we have a potential adult as a provider, a YPA, right? There's always a power dynamic, a power differential there. So I really appreciate you again sharing that. And really, again, highlighting for us what it means to be a provider who can really partner with youth in a way that's authentic, in a way that's culturally responsive, trauma informed, and really youth guided. So I've seen a couple of comments in terms of, having the youth have be the driver's seat, right? Similar to family driven care. Because when you're working with youth, sometimes too, also it is a caregiver. So with that, I do want to turn it over to Megan to really get us started and go into some of these concepts that we're going to cover in part 1. And then for part 2, we'll build on that with additional strategies. So, Megan.
All right, we can go to the next slide. So we're going to start by talking about the frameworks for us to be able to effectively partner with youth. Next slide. So first, we want to touch on youth-informed care. There are many ways to encourage youth voice and ensure partnership is occurring. The method that you use will really depend on the purpose of the youth's feedback. So we have forums and listening sessions. This can be used to discuss major topics of interest, policies, and program agency changes. You can also complete surveys, and then interviews can be used for qualitative and quantitative data to receive direct feedback on the service being provided. And then we also have councils, boards, and committees, and these can provide advisement to different agencies, individuals who are change makers and in positions of authority. Next slide. So youth-guided care. This means that young people have the right to be empowered, educated, and given a decision-making role in their care, their own lives, policy, and systems advocacy. When we're applying this to therapy, youth are given a voice that is sustained, it is acted upon, and it is referred to when making adjustments about their care. Youth-guided approaches really recognize the continuum of power that is shared with the youth based on their understanding and a maturity level. Their voice is encouraged and used in a strength-based approach. And creating an environment of safety is ensuring that a young person feels comfortable expressing their perspectives. Taking action in response to the youth's perspectives is also really necessary to creating that environment in which the youth feels respected. You can go on to the next slide. So then that leads us into the guiding principles of youth-guided care. The guiding principles are just that. They're to guide you. There aren't any mandatory rubrics that organizations have to follow word for word. Rather, these principles are used to help providers reflect and ensure that organization procedures and policies embody youth-guided care when delivering services. Youth-guided care focuses on 10 key tenets. We have shared decision-making, want to make sure that the youth's perspectives and their choice is really empowered and represented. We want to have the youth make informed choice. So youth need to receive clear, accurate, and complete information to make an informed choice about their services, the support they're receiving. We have family advocacy, and this is where every child has a family or a surrogate voice to advocate for them and make decisions if needed. Peer support is also really valuable. Youth, families, and family-run organizations engaging in peer support is really beneficial, and it reduces isolation and strengthens the youth voice. We have youth-directed programs. This is youth, families, and family-run organizations are helping to guide the decisions and advocate for meaningful choices within a program. We have practice transformation, where providers are actively shifting their approaches and their practice to be more youth-guided. Well, resource allocation, making sure that the staff have appropriate training, they have the resources, list of resources in the community, and they have the support needed to really sustain the youth-guided practices. Anti-stigma, of course, we want to focus on breaking stigmas and providing more clarity and information, both stigmas in the community and internalized stigmas. Cultural equity is really important. We want communities, agencies, and providers to value and celebrate cultural diversity and work to eliminate mental health disparities. And then we have cultural responsiveness. All individuals working with youth need to continuously improve their cultural and linguistic responsiveness. All right, and that'll take us to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Mohammed.
And in regards to youth-guided care, we really want to understand the role the provider has in delivering that care. So our services really need to shift from power over to power with. So what does that involve? So power over services really ensures that, goals and decisions are provider controlled and not necessarily any youth involvement is, involved. The relationship dynamic is more so hierarchical. It's deficit focused. So the youth is only seen as like, if they're non-compliant, they're limiting, authority and autonomy. So it's very much over them deciding for them. And really, what the challenges and barriers this presents is that it leads youth to be disengaged. Oftentimes, there's even the risk of re traumatization, and there's limited development for the youth because, again, it's the services are over them. They're not necessarily have a choice in how they can go about implementing those services. But throughout this training and the series, really, really want to emphasize the shift to power with services because that really involves centering the youth voice, ensuring that they have the autonomy through decision making and they have the supportive guidance to make those decisions. And we really see this through the relationship dynamics in terms of building a collaboration with them that empowers them as experts. But we also want to recognize that with power with services, there are some challenges in regards to systemic policies, work culture, and sometimes constraints, which can limit youth voice and power sharing, but we will explore those barriers and how we can overcome them. And as I said, with power with services, we really want to recognize youth as experts, and that's really experts in their own lived experience because they know what they like, what they don't like, their feelings, their culture, their past, and how it really impacts them. But we also want to recognize the provider's professional experience. We don't want to say that the youth's expertise is better than the provider. There's an equal level of care provided to both the youth and the provider's expertise. And that's really to emphasize that the provider knows how the diagnosis works and they understand the challenges in the mental health system. They have knowledge in the treatment approaches and they understand how the system works, how the organization works, and what resources would be best beneficial to providing that care for youth. Oh, you're muted.
Next, we have youth-led care. And in youth-led care, the young person is the decision maker. They're really leading how they want the services that they're receiving to proceed. Oftentimes, adults hold the authority. The provider determines what is the best treatment approach or that they feel is appropriate for the youth. Or the parents and guardians are stating that, there's a specific behavior or event that needs to be addressed. But when we're practicing youth guided care, we're really allowing the youth to have a final decision making on what they want to focus, what they find most important, what is really impacting them, and giving them that choice to decide, like, this is what I need to focus on, this is what's impacting me, and this is how I would like to receive treatment. We can go to the next slide. So we have trauma-informed care, and I know many of us here are familiar with this concept, but we're just going to do a little bit of a refresher. So trauma-informed care goes with the assumption that someone is more likely to have a history of trauma than not. And we really want to recognize the role that trauma can play in a young person's life. Trauma-informed organizations, programs, and practices, and staff all realize the prevalence of trauma. And they take this under consideration when moving forward with the care that they're providing. Trauma-informed care has 6 core principles. I really want to draw attention to 3 of these right now. So safety. We really need to create an environment of safety, not just physical safety in an office where other people aren't going to overhear the youth, but also emotional safety, psychological safety, cultural safety. These are all really important for embracing the youth and allowing them to feel most comfortable. Then we have empowerment, voice, and choice at the bottom here. This is critical when we're working with youth. There are different ways that we can empower youth depending on our role. Sometimes it's a really small strategy. It doesn't have to be something big and grandiose. But when we're empowering youth to have an opportunity to use their voice, and then we're giving them the opportunity to choose, that's only going to build their own skills and further the partnership. And then I have here collaboration and mutuality. We revisit this multiple times throughout this training. We really want to collaborate with youth. When we as a provider are making all of the decisions and leading the sessions and the treatment, it's not really collaboration. And the youth feels that, and they really recognize that. So we can move on to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Mohammed.
Thank you. And in regards to trauma-informed care, we also want to talk about culturally responsive care. And that really means providing services that respect and responds to a person's cultural backgrounds, that is equitable to them, understandable to them, and also affirming. While we also recognize that our own culture is not the default. And by what I mean by that is that our own cultural perspectives aren't the norm by which everyone else will follow. And that's really important to recognize, because when we understand that our own culture is not the norm, we are able to avoid biases that may negatively impact the care that the youth receives. And with culturally responsive care, this involves a lot of things. So there is cultural awareness, where we acknowledge the diversity, cultural humility, where there's the process of self-reflection and critical thinking, cultural sensitivity, where we recognize the need to respect cultural differences, and also, as Megan has stated, cultural safety, where we consider the socio-political context, the historical context of the families to determine how we can ensure the safety for the youth and the eventual families that are receiving the services. Because we want to ensure that the culturally responsive care services that we're providing is equitable to them in a way that recognizes not only the importance of trauma-informed care, but also utilizes and incorporates anti-racist practice. So now we are going to watch a video in regards to microaggressions in therapy. In the chat, there will be some questions, and I really want you to pay attention to the language that is being used by the provider, who is the person in the male in the glasses, and the care recipient, who is the woman sitting across from him. So just be mindful of what the dynamic is, what microaggressions is being displayed, and how it is affecting the care recipient.
Real change can happen. Can you work harder? I mean, have you thought about that?
Can I work harder? No, I can't.
So you're already, I mean, you're spent, pretty well spent?
I mean, I'm doing the exact same tasks as the other RNs in our department, so there's nothing more than I can do.
That does make things difficult. And I don't know, what do you think you'll do? What's the next step for you?
I don't know. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to find ways to manage the stress.
Yeah, we'll probably look into some, relaxation type exercises that we could work through. There's some different strategies that we can try. I want to be sure that we haven't just hit more of the practical things here too. That getting out there into the big boy world is tough, and it's about pulling up the bootstraps and getting out there and doing what we can, and not cowering down every time someone hurts our feelings. It's just I know that could be a little bit of tough love, but I think you can succeed if you try hard.
So just to be clear, if you're
Okay. So I do see a lot of chat in the chat happening. So what type of microaggression is being demonstrated here? And I did see in the chat that is invalidating the person's experiences, and how the provider is demonstrating this, as I see in the chat, like implying that the person isn't a big boy, of assuming that she's not working hard enough in this big boy world. And it's almost very shaming. And it's very much, impacting how the person is engaging with them in the sense of, as I see, he is minimizing her feelings and her experiences. And so I really want to ask, what could the provider have done differently to partner with the youth, where they can avoid those, as I see in the chat, micro invalidations? Be empathetic. Sometimes it really is that simple. Be more empathetic and be non-judgmental, because what if the person is working as hard as they can? We want to ensure that you actually listen to her, encourage her, and also acknowledging that sometimes they are working as hard as they could. And assuming, oh, I see here, assume that the person is the expert because they are the expert. And that's really what we want to emphasize when we say that we want to shift away from power over to power with services. And one of the ways we can really do that is by breaking down those power dynamics. Now, one of the things we want to emphasize in regards to power over services, that oftentimes that it really involves adultism. Now, adultism is a form of youth oppression, which is rooted in stereotypes that a young person lacks the ability or intelligence, and it can appear where the youth can dismiss the adult can dismiss the youth's input. And this could happen where a youth is asking for a more personalized request, but the adult is just dismissing them and just really prioritizing a standardized plan, which can lead the youth to feel unheard or disengaged. And adultism is really a roadblock because it is an antithesis to youth-guided care, because it undermines the youth by prioritizing the adult control over the collaboration that needs to be happening with the youth. And this not only damages the trust and the rapport, but it also reinforces the belief that youth cannot meaningfully contribute to the decisions about their own lives. And we really want to emphasize that youth are expert in their own lives and over themselves. And with that, we really want to emphasize another shift from doing the work for the youth to doing the work with the youth. And that shift really requires the shared decision-making aspect, where the youth not only hold meaningful power, especially the care they receive, but also they have a role and influence over the services and plans that impact them. And regarding shared decision-making, this really comes up through ensuring that the youth have a voice and choice. Now, voice and choice is essential for youth because it involves multiple things. It involves ensuring that the youth have a meaningful way that they can express their goals. They build ownership over their care. They are able to engage with the provider in a more authentic way. They can contribute as capable partners because, again, they are experts on their own lives and over their own self. And all of this is really to emphasize that you can strengthen the trust and service effectiveness of the care that the youth is receiving, especially when the provider is actively incorporating the feedback that the youth is giving them. So this means, not necessarily disregarding the youth's input, but incorporating the youth's input to make it more personalized for them. And we really want to understand the importance of voice and choice, because when youth don't have a voice or choice, they may feel powerless, distressed, and distrustful towards adults and even the systems that they are involved in. Whereas shared decision-making really promotes that emotional safety and regulation. And as you'll hear time and time again, that authentic engagement with the provider and with the youth. And I will pass it off to Kara.
Mohammed. So we did want to share with you a way to include the voice of the youth at all times. we have created this tool. It's a feedback survey. It's also kind of like, how do we assess the way we're using youth guided care with youth? So I'm going to bring up the document. I put it in the chat. We broke it up into at the beginning of services and at the end of the services. And one of the reasons we're showing you this as well is because we would like you to use it before our next training. Okay. So Mohammed, can I share my slides? Okay. Oh, it's great to see everyone. Hi. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to take you through the tool, and we will upload it here. And I don't, Felicia, can we send it afterwards?
Absolutely, and it'll be posted on the website as well.
Awesome. We think it just would be fantastic if you all would give this a try before next Friday, which is our part 2. But I'm going to take you through it, right? So the idea is that you're really hearing from the youth, you're gathering the youth perspective. And so, as I mentioned, we have in the beginning of care, and then we have our second page is during ongoing care. So if you're working with somebody new, if you have a new teenager or youth you're working with, you can say to them, it's really important that I include your voice and your experiences in everything that we do here together, okay? And one of the things that I'd like to do is just ask you a few questions as we begin to work together. And so you can do this with them, or you can do it, you can ask them to complete it. But there is some anonymity, and we want to make sure that their responses are there's space for honesty, right? So that it's really important. So this last bullet point right here, your responses will not in any way affect the services you receive, but may help to improve them. That's a really important sentiment to express. So number 1 is when we first started working together, my provider described each of our roles, how we work together, and how I can contact them. And then there are some examples, and the youth can say rarely, sometimes often. My provider helps me to understand my mental health diagnosis and how it impacts me, rarely, sometimes, or often. And then there are also comments. My provider asked me about my previous experiences with other professional supports. My provider talks to me about my goals and what I want to achieve with them. And then number 5 is my provider is curious to understand how my family life affects me, my identity, and my experiences. So this does actually take some humility, right? It does take some cultural humility, and it is an amazing way to really show the youth that you are here and you want to engage with them and you want to bring their voice into everything that you do together. Please chat in any questions, but then this is the second part. The second option is during ongoing care. So perhaps there's a young person you've been working with for a while and you want to just ask them, and they could go back to think about the beginning of care with you, or they can think about ongoing care. So we realized that there were kind of 2 parts to this. So you can use it in whatever way best feels best for you. We'd love to hear about your experiences. We have not this is the first time we are sharing this in live and in the world. And so you may have some ideas about it as well that we'd love to hear. Any questions, any thoughts? I don't know if my colleagues, Mohammed, Diana, or Megan, you have any thoughts as well?
Yeah, so in terms of the document, there was a question as to whether or not this is available in Spanish. And I will say currently it is not. We do have some tools that are available, some assessments resources for caregivers that are available. But as Kara mentioned, this is the first time we're sharing it. So we would love to also hear your feedback. Your feedback is much appreciated. I have seen some feedbacks, some comments also in terms of how to improve the webinars for more inclusivity. So again, your feedback is highly valued and we'll definitely take that into account. But we would love to turn this into a Spanish version or other translations for that matter. So any feedback, please feel free to share that with us either today or in the next webinar or via email at ctech.info at nyu.edu. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, once it's final, we will be sure to translate it into Spanish. Thank you for asking that. It's so important. And also, Felicia will send this around after today, but we're going to ask in our next training, were you able to use it? And what was that experience like? Just to give you a heads up. And we'd love to hear from you. Mohammed? Oh, this is me. So sorry. Yeah. So we want to move into talking about barriers. So we talked about our frameworks. We talked about breaking down those power dynamics, how important that is. We want to now think about what gets in the way, right? So chat into me. What gets in the way? What are some barriers? Well, I guess maybe we should go to the next slide and talk about what is a barrier. So first of all, this is what a barrier is. I'm sure you all know this, but just for level setting, right? Barriers are anything that prevents a youth and their family from accessing and receiving necessary mental health care. Oh, so many chat-ins. Thank you. Okay, school, biases, parents, guardians, home life, environments, lack of engagement. What is a barrier, though, to that is one of our questions. Transportation. Great. Therapists must be open. It is not personal attack, but designed to gain helpful insight. Oh, you like the survey. Thank you. Health insurance is a barrier for sure. Cultural reservations. Yes, absolutely. Transportation. Living in rural areas. Yep. Friends, peer pressure, and distractions. Absolutely. Fear. Yes, we're going to talk a lot about fear. This is amazing. Thank you. Stigma, policy, parents, insurance. Thank you. Fantastic. Systemic red tapes, bad past experiences. You all are amazing. Yes. Shame, stigma, overly clinical language. Yes. Legal issues, self-esteem and trust. Trust. Yes. Stigma. Thank you. Fantastic. Language. Teen parenting. All right, well, we're done with barriers because everybody named them all. This is amazing. We put them in 4 different sections. If you could go to the next slide, we're thinking about them in 4 different ways. We could think about them in a lot of different ways. We thought this would be most helpful for our conversation. And you all have actually kind of identified a barrier in each of these. Systemic or an organizational, right? You all mentioned systems where like legal issues, right? Insurance issues, systemic and organizational barriers are huge, practical and concrete. You all mentioned transportation, not being able to get to appointments, and other insurance issues. Those really concrete barriers that get in the way. Family ecology. So family support or not support, or shame or stigma from experiences, perceptional, attitudinal, trust, right? Do I trust this person to work with me and help me, right? So you all identified all of these. Thank you so much. Let's talk a little more about systemic and organizational. So if we could go to the next slide. So there are kind of a few different pieces to this. So there's like the organizational and delivery approaches, right? So some of the services that are provided actually are not youth guided, right? They're really like they're top down. They don't really think about bringing the use of voice and collaboration into them. There are sometimes power struggles between providers and youth, right? The agencies really are worried about the numbers. How many people are they serving? Are they getting all their billing things fulfilled and all of that? That becomes a barrier, right? When a youth feels like a number and not actually a person. Not having younger or relatable staff. So this is why so I do want to point out that we have intentionally created this presentation with Muhammad and Megan to really also operationalize youth guided care, right? We think it's really important to also do what we're saying to do. And they brought this up, like sometimes organizations don't have younger staff or staff that youth can relate to, and that can be a barrier, right? And not having accessible days or office hours for youth. A lot of youth are busy, right? Some have jobs, some only have availability at certain times, and are there services that can meet those needs? And then there are systemic level issues, right? So whereas maybe the service is mandated and there are a bunch of barriers around mandated treatment. Are there multiple providers in the youth's life with different perspectives? Sometimes those conflict. There's a history of harm from systems. Some of our youth have been involved in so many different systems, whether it's the child welfare or juvenile injustice system, or so many other systems that they may be a part of, right? And then there's a lack of cultural representation or reliability. So these are all kind of those bigger systemic organizational barriers that really do impact authentic engagement. Any thoughts around these? Okay, we can move to the next one. And then there are those practical and concrete concerns or barriers, right? So those logistics that we mentioned around
I'm
scheduling.
sorry, before we move forward, I just thought about quickly one more practical barrier. I think it's one of or other barrier that we have is when we don't have the bilingual staff that can offer children the services or teenagers with the notion that they might speak the language, English, and the parents might not be familiar with the language. So that is a huge thing, a huge barrier that not every agency is able to offer. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. That is missing. Thank you so much. Huge.
Yeah, absolutely appreciate that. Yeah, so as Kara was mentioning, these are not, we've kind of divided it into different labels, but they are interconnected, right? Some of them might be organizational systemic because there's just not enough people in the field or within the organization that are representative of the people that you're working with, right? So that's when you see some of those issues, and we can probably talk about that later on, or actually shortly, but just to piggyback on what Kara was saying, in terms of some of those more practical and concrete issues, right? And again, all of you really went into our slides before we went into them and are aware of the barriers, which is great, right? The fact that you're aware of the barriers is indicating that you are knowledgeable of, hey, this might be an obstacle. So now we're shifting primarily more so in part two. What do we do about these things, right? But again, just to kind of piggyback on some of the ones that were mentioned earlier, the logistics, right? If we're talking about a young person, either they might need an adult to accompany them to an appointment. So it's figuring out work schedules, school schedules, in combination with maybe some transportation issues. And I did see someone in the chat say something about, we're advocating to maybe have our office hours go till 6 p.m., right? At the end of sort of your quote unquote typical business day or work day for a parent, if they're coming over for a child, maybe after school, or if they have after school programs, right? Things that they find joy in that are really helping them with any stresses that they're having. But appointments in our agencies, organizations overlap with that. So conflicts in terms of scheduling, transportation issues, the clinical structure there, as was mentioned beforehand, right? Maybe the appointment times don't really match up, or we don't have folks that are, again, maybe culturally responsive or trauma-informed trained in that maybe don't have that primarily maybe understanding, right? We all know that how much representation really matters. Communication, I think, is another one too. So similar to, I believe it was Digna who might have mentioned it. If the provider is very heavy on the clinical jargon, right? And I'm speaking to a younger child, or there are maybe some cultural differences in terms of like translations, right? And some of the words that we use might not translate the same way if we're trying to convey information maybe to a provider. So yes, that clinical jargon, right? Which is important, but it's not maybe the best use of that terminology when we're speaking with a young person and their caregivers. And as was mentioned earlier, right, those power dynamics, those imbalances, whether you are a certified youth peer advocate still working with another youth, right? Or more of an older provider or working with a young person, or the caregiver with the young person, right? Those power dynamics are something that we definitely need to be aware of. So as mentioned earlier by Mohammed, right? How do we move from doing for to doing with? Right. And some of the examples that were shared even in the video, like how do we really partner with that? And I'm not the expert as a provider. How can I create the space and invite you to share what might be helpful for you? But part of that also is creating that sense of safety. And on the following slide there, we do have a couple of other barriers that were mentioned. I know some of you earlier on mentioned the family can also be a barrier towards engagement, right? And there's a lot here, but if we talk about maybe the family ecology, maybe on a cultural level, right? How many of you have heard of that saying, what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors, what happens in this home stays within the home, right? We don't air our dirty laundry. So the idea of going to an outside quote unquote professional to provide support for my child or for our family might be something that we're not comfortable with or open to, right? So again, how do we maybe create an environment that allows for the youth and the family to feel comfortable to come, and talk about what might be concerning to them. I did see stigma for sure. A lot of communities are not open or receptive to mental health services. There is also stigma around that. I saw an earlier comment about caregivers also being in denial that their child can get better. So I think that also overlaps with, is there even a mental health problem, right? What are youth concerned about, right? I'm providing everything for them, right? So almost devaluing the concerns or stressors that youth might have. So those sort of overlap a little bit with the culture and community in terms of parent and caregiver. So, as a provider, you're working with a young person, you may be working also with the caregiver, but keep in mind how that caregiver is impacting the youth and the overall services, right? And is there anything that you can do to support that caregiver in order to be able to support that young person as well? So, yeah, I appreciate that. Be familiar with reading some of the more recent ones. Be familiar with youth language, slangs used. Yes, absolutely, right? At times there is sort of a bit of a generational difference, and I personally need to Google some things to figure out what is the actual meaning by what's being said. So thank you so much for sharing those, and definitely continue to share those. Kara, turn it back to you.
Yeah, yep. Thank you. So we want to move into perceptual barriers. And as you can see, there's a lot of crossover, right? Because stigma and shame could also be considered a perceptional attitudinal barrier. And we think about these in 3 different ways: trust and safety, identity, and autonomy. There is some statistic that we're always scanning for safety, all of us, right? At all times. We're animals. We're human beings. We're also mammals, right? And so our brains are constantly seeking safety. If we've experienced trauma and any harm, our brains are doing that even in a faster way. And so I bring that up because there's some statistic around, if you're in a therapeutic relationship, you are determining within like the first 3 minutes whether this is going to be helpful for you, right? That's why early engagement is so, so important. And so maybe young people have learned not to trust adults, right? That becomes a huge barrier. Maybe they're scared of being harmed again or abandoned or what have you. That's a huge barrier, huge perceptual barrier. And some of these things are unconscious, right? So sometimes it may not be conscious, like I'm worried that I'm going to be abandoned, but it's there, it's present. And so they're going to want to make sure if you don't show up to the appointment, that's why it's so important that there's constant communication. Like maybe you're not feeling well, but how does a youth interpret that if they've had some history of abandonment or harm, right? And then of course, yeah, the trauma response is always impacting. Any other perceptual barriers that we haven't mentioned here? Anybody want to chime in? So autonomy, where youth really want to be on their own and be independent, and sometimes it's limited, right? Again, because of the adultism that Mohammed talked about. Okay, if you biases around youth, right? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to I'm going to go through this quickly because we're talking about barriers. The next training is really like, how do we attend to barriers, right? So the next slide is really about how youth expertise is overlooked. This is just some takeaways for you to think about. Okay, so sometimes youth, their reaction is labeled as resistance or noncompliance. We're going to talk a lot about that in a little bit. Their survival and trauma responses, that those may be pathologized, right? Over reliance on diagnoses and assessments can overlook youth expertise. We want to make sure that the youth expertise is in the room. Your expertise is really important too. It's in the room too. I'm not saying that is not. That's a fact. That's a given. We also want to bring in the youth expertise as well, make sure it's not overlooked. And see that last point, provider bias and or disregard of youth culture and expertise incredibly important. You can go to the next slide. And then we talked a lot about trauma-informed care, right, as one of our frameworks. And so we want to think about there's perceptual and attitudinal barriers around trauma-informed care. And some of those are like some people may not be familiar with the impact of trauma, right? That becomes a barrier. So we want to make sure we have a real understanding in our organizations around, trauma ACEs. I'm sure everybody knows what ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are, and the impact of those, because the impact is so pervasive, right? Not only our physical health, but yes, our mental health. Yes, there's more a risk of suicidal ideation or suicidal attempts. Yes, there's more anxiety and depression connected with trauma, right? So we want to make sure that we have proper education around that. And those approaches, those trauma-informed approaches, we don't want to re-traumatize youth. And sometimes we may do that unintentionally. So we just want to be really mindful of that. We can go to the next slide.
And so with the trauma-informed care, we also want to acknowledge the youth barriers that exist. So sometimes youth may not even recognize their experience as trauma because it feels so normal for them. I know that was my experience like growing up because no one really said otherwise, and that was my normal. Then there's also the stigma and shame that they feel about what they've experienced. Maybe they experienced something really traumatic, but there's also the shame of that they can't really open up. So they feel unsafe even disclosing painful events. And I know Megan had mentioned earlier that emotional safety, that psychological safety, because that needs to exist for a youth to even talk about their distressing memories. So if that doesn't exist, they may not do that with their provider. And sometimes, and in some cases, diagnosis or symptoms may even limit their ability and comfort in sharing. So that is another thing we have to be mindful of. So when we look at the youth barriers to culturally responsive care, there is the matter of recognizing the barriers to the structural barriers and the inequitable outcomes. So there's obviously the structural racism and the unequal power dynamics that it can create. There's the language barriers by people, but even the materials. So going back to what Diana was saying with that clinical jargon, if that's not being properly translated, then it creates that power dynamic of just saying, I know more than you. This is my professional expertise is better than your youth expertise. And unfortunately, there's also the re-traumatization of youth. We also see that there's the bias, trust, and misinterpretation from the provider bias. And if they are not necessarily practicing their cultural humility, that can really also impact the misinterpretation of the actions and behaviors that youth are exhibiting. And even misreading youth communication. So, not necessarily keeping up with like the slang and anything of that sort, and just misreading what they're actually saying can, again, impact the services that they're receiving. And when we look at power practice and the service impact, there's also a matter of the professional compliance over that collaboration with youth that we are emphasizing time and time again. Because that's the collaboration where the authentic engagement and that just authentic and fruitful conversation will come from. There's also risk aversion. So that may be where if a youth is asking for a personalized plan and the provider is more so leaning towards a standardized plan, that standardized plan may be safe, but is it really beneficial for the youth and the services that they're asking for? And there's also the emphasis on diagnosis only. And this is really important because we want to let youth know that they're more than their diagnosis. Their identity is not necessarily tied to their diagnosis. They're more than who they are. They're more than their trauma and every other challenges and barriers that they've experienced.
Right. So, quick show of hands, who has heard of resistance or noncompliance or experienced a situation where they felt that a youth may have been resisting engagement? Let's see. Yep. Okay, so we're familiar with this. We've seen it, but I really want us to recognize what this is and reframe it. So when we're thinking of resistance, this is a very, clinical term, and we hear it in those fields and in the books that we're studying. But we have to change the language of this when we're working with young people. Resistance, let's reframe it to caution. What is the caution behind the lack of engagement? So we can go to the next slide. One of the things we want to consider is the nocebo effect, which is an attitudinal failure. And this is the opposite of the placebo effect. Nocebo effect is when a youth has experienced negative interactions with a previous provider, and therefore they feel like any provider is going to mistreat them. So they're going into this situation with a negative perception of a new provider. You can go to the next slide. So you'll see in your handouts a lot of different suggestions for how to reframe caution when we're reframe resistance to caution when we're witnessing this. This is a protective strategy. This can also indicate that a young person is experiencing some fear or they don't have a choice in their treatment. It can also be an indicator that you may not have or be aware of an approach or a treatment style that is going to be most beneficial for the youth's needs. So there's a lot to take under consideration. We can go to the next slide. So next we have an activity. You can do this on your own. It is in your handouts that you'll be receiving. This is just to help you practice reframing resistance to caution in the moment. We really want to recognize that resistance isn't non-compliance. It's really caution based on their own experiences. So I definitely encourage you to check that out in the handouts later on, maybe take some time to self-reflect and go on to the next slide. And this slide is just answering some of these, giving some suggestions. Again, this is in your handout. Definitely encourage you to check this out later on and really consider how may it apply to you. Have you been caught in any of these initial thoughts and then recognized, oh, wow, you need to reframe this? We can go to the next slide and I will pass it over to Diana.
Thank you, Megan. So yes, right. So if you are working with a young person and it seems like there's a little bit of caution there, right? The quote unquote, like resistance per se, what can you do? So again, we'll talk about strategies a little bit more in depth, but we did want to give you some information so that maybe you can start thinking about that now. So clearly it seems you're aware of some of these barriers. This one is, as Megan just mentioned, is a little bit more different, right? It's a bit of a mind shift. So some things that we have here, and you'll have additional suggestions or tips or strategies in the handout as well, is more about just, for example, maybe taking a step back, right? And asking yourself, are you maybe in a way inadvertently creating some of that hesitation, right? So are you working with a youth and using things that are developmentally appropriate? Are you bringing in things that are of interest to that particular young person that might help to keep them more engaged, that might really indicate that you are partnering with them in their care? Certainly that shift again from, oh, well, this, young person maybe isn't prioritizing, their care, maybe is prioritizing other things or whatnot. Really just, again, shifting it towards the fact that this youth is probably doing the best that they can, right? So again, approaching it with more curiosity to find out what is holistically happening in that young person's life. And again, that shift of maybe giving them that benefit of the doubt, and clearly doing things like instilling hope and helping to build resilience, right? Everyone is in front of you for a particular reason. From the stories that were shared earlier on through the fireside chat, right? We might not get the full picture if we're not creating that safe space to ask questions, to really listen, not just hear what the youth is saying, but really listen. And again, really partnering with them. So again, just some strategies here for you as you can work towards partnering with youth that you feel might not be fully engaged. And again, as suggested beforehand through Kara, right, we have that survey, but really just asking them, right? Like there's a couple of actually also self-reflection questions in the handout, but there's only so much information that you as a provider can give, right? It's how do you, again, get that information and give space and time to that youth voice. So again, just some additional strategies on your handout. And on the next slide, There is a book here that we've pulled maybe some strategies from you for you to take away with you. Again, a couple of things here, just reframing your perspective, as was just mentioned, slowing the pace of the session, right? Similar to what we do with other folks, is sort of meeting them where they're at. With youth too, where are they at, but what's their speed? Where are they at? We might have to slow it down a little bit. Some youth, might be ready to go, right? What are some of maybe those potential generational differences, and how can we really align with what they need at that time? Obviously mentioning any responses and encouraging your youth to kind of think about the holistic, any holistic stressors, right? Giving the time for that so that they're feeling heard, which is, I think, what some of you mentioned in the comments, right, is even through the video, listening, paying attention, asking the questions, and also just saying, hey, I maybe didn't understand that correctly. Can you repeat that? Did I get this right? Right. So again, you're building that collaboration for youth as well. And on the following slide, we do just want to close off here with a quote from the author of the previous book. You cannot change your clients. You can only change how you interact with your clients, right? So we do want to leave off with that before I turn it over to my colleague, is that you are in the position where you are going to have to adjust to really work with the young person in front of you. And we recognize that takes a lot, right? Because I might be working with someone who requires one thing in this one session, and then I have to switch gears and do that. So there is a lot of shifting around, and we do recognize that the work that you do is heavy. The work that you do is also valuable and important. So it's sometimes just more of a reminder of the way that we approach folks is not a one size fits all, right? Similar to the frameworks that were mentioned earlier on, right? How do I shift things to make sure that I am culturally responsive and trauma informed? But there might be some nuances here along the way too. So how do I present myself? How am I showing up for that individual, for that young person, as well as their family? So it is a lot of different hats and juggling things. So again, we do acknowledge that, but sometimes it is helpful just to remind ourselves that I need to do that work in order to be able to support youth. And you're clearly all here because you do want to support youth in whatever capacity you are doing it. So again, thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kara.
Thank you, Diana. So this is the last segment of our training today, nurturing trust. The biggest thing that we can do to attend to caution, to attend to authentic engagement, is to nurture trust. Chat into me. How do you nurture trust? How do you do that with the people you work with? Active and reflective listening. Yes, that nurtures trust. One of the things that I do is I make sure that I'm very transparent about everything that we're doing and why we're doing it and what this looks like. We have stay consistent. Yes. Clearly outlining confidentiality, being on their side. Amazing. You follow up. You're honest. Explain the transparency. Yeah, a lot of you do that as well. Thank you. You listen and you don't judge. Follow through with what you say. That is so important. That is so important. Asking for clarification. Don't make assumptions, right? Yes, thank you. We're going to watch an example of nurturing trust. So this is about a 3-minute video that my colleagues and I put together with a young person. So we're going to watch this little video on nurturing trust, and then we're just going to talk a little bit about it and wrap up, okay? So here we go. This is Sam. Sam is a 17-year-old young man who has a history of anxiety and being bullied. He's a junior in high school and doesn't have many friends. He went to therapy once before and it wasn't a good experience. Sam lives with his mom and younger sister. And so we are going to see Dr. Rodriguez talk to Sam.
Before we get into the reasons why you might be here and what's happening, I just noticed that it looks like you're pretty uncomfortable being here. Just want to check in with you. What is it like for you to be here right now?
It's weird. I don't know.
Kind of feels like you don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Okay. I could understand that. Therapies can be really weird. Getting to know someone who doesn't really know you very well, and sharing all kinds of stuff about yourself.
Yeah.
I saw that you had been in therapy before, but it didn't go too well. I wanted to know if you could share a little bit about that.
Well, I saw the school counselor one day, and just didn't seem like she cared really.
What was it that she did that showed you that she didn't really care?
I tried to talk with her, but I just didn't feel like she was listening really.
So, if I understand it well, you went to get help, you went to see her, and you got nothing.
I got some water.
Well, now I feel bad. I don't even have water to give you. I'm wondering if there is something we can do here that can help you feel more comfortable. And I'm wondering if there's anything I can do to show you that I care.
Well, I don't even know you. Maybe we could get to know each other a little bit.
That makes sense. You don't know me, and I am just barely getting to know you. And it's weird because then we're supposed to talk about challenges or problems you might have, and I'm getting into your business. I'm perfectly fine with you getting to know me better and asking questions about me if you'd like, especially if that's going to help you feel more comfortable. There's definitely time for that.
Okay.
So I do know your mom has said that she wants you to get help. She's worried about you. But I'm curious, what would you like to get out of therapy?
Well, my friends aren't nice to me all the time, and I just don't really feel good all the time.
So when you say your friends aren't nice to you, I know your mom mentioned something about you getting bullied at the school. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Sam, I can imagine how difficult it's been. And there's definitely some work that we can do around how do you connect with your friends and have your friendships be something that's positive in your life.
Yeah. Hopefully I can be happier and communicate with my friends more, maybe.
In some ways, that is in part what therapy is about, is being able to live and be happier in your life, and for sure connecting with others.
What'd you think? He's meeting him where he's at. He's engaging. Gives him permission to ask questions. Yes. You like the approach? Yes. He's being empathic. He's using his words, right? He's reflecting, but also supporting, right? So we did have a few questions. It seems like you all answered them. If we could go to the next slide. What did Dr. Rodriguez say that validated Sam's behavior and feelings? What did he say? He agreed with him. He gave Sam control. He took that time to build a rapport. So he said, you can ask me questions, right? You can ask me questions about myself. Yeah, he recognized some of his fears, some of the things he had been through, right? How did Dr. Rodriguez promote youth voice and choice? He made him feel like it was normal to have the feelings he had, right? Someone chatted in, fantastic. He validated the fact that Sam knows nothing about him and how that can be a barrier to building trust. Yes. So Dr. Rodriguez's tone and body language showed he was open to being connected. Yes. So he was the pacing, the holding of the environment, right? Everything he was doing was nurturing trust. I'm glad you all took that away. Thank you. Fantastic. We are now going to see if you all have any questions. So we can go to the next slide. Any questions you have for any of us? Anything that's come up that's concerning for you?
Yes, feel free to share any questions. We can either answer them now or anything that we don't get a chance to, we can certainly do in part 2. There just was one thing. I think some of the questions that have come up, we've sort of answered, but again, if you have anything, please feel free to share. But I did see a comment here about whether or not part 2 will be available. So if you are here for part 1, you have been automatically registered for part 2. You can certainly attend. If other folks haven't been able to attend part 1, they can attend part 2. So we'll figure out maybe how to get that link out. Unfortunately, those CEs won't be available. But I think the best practice here might be watching part 1 and part 2, since they sort of build on each other. So that would maybe be a suggestion there. But again, if you want to do CEs, it is for participating in part 1 and part 2.
I do have a question. I don't know if this is appropriate. And more like looking for guidelines. So if in this particular case, I had a good relationship with the client and very good trust, and the client came, 16-year-old, share that something stupid that she did and she got punished by mom physically, and I had to call CPS because I had to. So since that time, that trust kind of shifted a little, and she openly say, I cannot trust you anymore because I trusted you with something that it was so profound and intimate from me and my mom. And I know what she did was right because I did something wrong, but you call CPS. So how do I get that trust back? It's very hard. I'm validating, I'm joining her that I will probably not trust it, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything else that I can possibly try? Because I know she's there every week. But I know she's holding something back because she's fearful to continue sharing something. Although the relationship with mom after that CPS call had flipped over and is going well. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so I would love to address this one. Someone put in the chat time. I'm gonna second that. It's gonna take longer to regain that trust than it took to establish that trust. It's gonna think about it taking double, maybe triple the amount of time to then rebuild that. Another thing is validate that she has caution now, validate that she is uncomfortable, validate the fact that you understand why she doesn't really want to confide in you anymore. That's really important. And also like understand the youth's perspective in this situation. Kind of reframe yourself, put yourself in her shoes, and really understand where she's coming from when she had that trust with you, and then you had to take different actions for valid reasons, and now that trust is kind of struggling there. Really have compassion and consideration for that, and then again, just be patient. It's going to take more time to rebuild that trust than it took to build it initially.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've noticed that getting the trust from her wasn't really that difficult. We start talking and sharing, but it's taking much longer. But just yesterday, after like probably 6 months, she shared something about the boyfriend. But it's like, oh my gosh, she started trusting me again, but I don't know how. I'm more like, what should I say? How should I do? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like hesitant now to maybe trigger that distrust again. So thank you. I really appreciate for your input and everyone's input in the chat as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the Melody, I saw you come off mute. Would you like to share your question?
Yeah. How do you navigate a patient that says that they want to be there, but their presentation when they're in the actual space is like pulling teeth to get them to talk?
So that would be caution, right? They want to get better. They really want to get better. They have that awareness, which is why they're saying, I want to be there. I want to receive treatment, right? But then there is a lot of caution that they have. So I would encourage you to go back, look at the reasons for caution and the reframing strategies for caution. You'll see those in the handouts. If we could put them in the chat again, just refreshing them, but really consider that caution and then allow time, and then maybe not even really get into the deep stuff that needs to be addressed. Maybe reshift your focus to building rapport. Dr. Rodriguez did really great with that casualness and the interaction. Depending on the age of the youth, I would encourage coloring, actually coloring, having some different coloring pages. And I'll be the person to say, when I was 16, I preferred to color in my therapy session than talk straight, because when our body is active, the brain tends to naturally open up a little bit more. So that's what I would suggest to you.
Mohammed,
And
do you have anything to add? Okay.
yes, and I would also like to add, even considering the accessibility, is their environment even affecting the way they're able to open up? So can you explore, is it a possibility for you to explore, can you do a virtual session? Or even if you
She's
are going
dead
to do
set
a virtual
against
session,
it. She's dead set against it.
got
She
it.
will
And
not even do it as like in between. If I'm not physically able to be present in the office,
mhm,
she won't even do like a interim therapy session via telehealth. She's just been very hard, like nut to crack, and I keep on reaffirming to her, like, this
mhm,
is your space.
right.
You said to me that you've been here before and it didn't work out for you. I want this to be good for you. I need you to give
Mhm,
me your feedback because this is your time, and I
right.
can't be effective in what I'm doing for you or what I'm saying and working with you if you're not giving me your feedback. And when you give me your feedback and I give you what I think you need,
Mhm,
and you're still really not giving me much, it makes it difficult to know how we proceed here.
mhm. And I think that honesty and transparency is really important because you're acknowledging, like, I want to help you, but for me to help you, you have to help you essentially. So, and with the patients, it's just rolling with the youth, allowing them time to feel that not only that physical safety, but also that emotional and psychological safety. So I believe through your transparency, I think that allows it to let them know, like, this is my space. If I want things to get done, I need to utilize it. And you are there. You're not necessarily demanding that they do something, but you're encouraging them. And I think that's really different. Not necessarily telling them, but you're doing the work with them.
Thank
Yeah,
you so much, Mohammed and Megan, for that. Yeah, so I'm also mindful of time. So if on the couple of the following slides, we have some references that we use for the training. They can certainly also be used as resources. So appreciate you asking questions. Appreciate you collaborating too. And if there's any questions that you might have that are lingering, please put them in the chat box. We will save them. And maybe we can return to them in part 2, because I just want to be mindful of folks' time here. So on the following slide, we do also have some upcoming events. Just as a reminder, we do have part 2 next Friday, same time, 10:30 to 12. Certainly hope to see you again. And then for other folks, we have a training in March, the basics of a trauma-informed violence screening and assessment with youth and families. So we have heard from providers that they are being tasked to do this and don't really know. There's concerns about doing that. I don't know how to do it, where to go, what is needed. So obviously you'll see there the trauma-informed care piece there in terms of really looking at the rationale behind the behavior. And on our very last slide, I just want to say a huge thank you on behalf of myself and our presenters. Thank you for taking the time to spend with us today. You will be receiving a link to just a feedback form. Again, any thoughts, suggestions, feedback that you have based on here, any additional things that you'd like to, topics that you'd like to learn more about, please share that. Again, this offering came out of your feedback, so we do take a look at those. So feel free to visit our website, mcsilverta.org, and any questions or concerns, please email us at ctag.info@nyu.edu. And again, thank you so much on behalf of presenters. Thank you and have a good weekend. Have a great weekend.
Everybody, please use that survey with somebody. Melody, you could say to the young person, I just went to a training to work on partnering better with young people, including you, because I really care about you. Would you mind filling this out with me? Use that survey with her. We'd love to hear about it next Friday. So please use the survey with at least one of the young people you work with, and we'll pick back up there next Friday. Okay, everyone, have a great week. Thanks for being with us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.